Recently, I have begun doing motivational storytelling because I've always been a storyteller, and I just have created a lot of strategies for wellness that have been very effective for me. So I don't give advice, not qualified to give advice. I don't pretend to give advice. What I really do is just tell my own stories, and if there's anything there of use to you, then so be it. So I'm 57 and a half, and when I was about 24 and pregnant with my second child, I started to have really chronic back problems. And I knew that I'd had scoliosis, a not terribly uncommon condition, and that it is a degenerative spinal condition, but it hadn't really bothered me, so I didn't pay any attention to it. But it started to become a real problem for me, again, 23, 24 years old, and to the point where it was like really keeping me from doing my work as a jeweler, and just constant pain. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And I kept winding up in the emergency room. It kept kind of locking up on me and stuff like that. And it got so bad that, and I didn't have health insurance. So I couldn't really afford a lot of the sort of typical doctor visits, and chiropractors wanted me to come in for a couple of years, and I was like, well, I can't even afford to be here, you know? So it just started becoming really discouraging too, because I couldn't work, I couldn't pick up my kids, all this kind of stuff. And I had an x-ray done of my back, and the doctor said, this is going to be really kind of creepy to look at this because you've probably never seen a picture of your back. And he showed it to me, and it was not only curved in one direction, but it was curved in two directions. It was really twisted in a couple of directions. And I thought for sure he had it wrong, you know, that that was a 80-year-old woman's back or something, you know. And I just cried, you know. I was just like, how could I possibly be that kind of terrible looking, you know, at such a young age? And he said, well, it is a degenerative spinal condition, so unfortunately, it's just going to get a lot worse. And he said, you could have a rod, we could do surgery and have a rod put in your back, but the bad news is that bone is stronger and it will continue to deteriorate, and it will bend and eventually break the rod. So I said, well, that doesn't really sound like a great option, you know, anyways, and I can't afford it. So he said, you actually need to prepare yourself, because by the time you're 40, you're going to be in a wheelchair. He said, this is a really symptomatic back. It's really advancing very fast. And by the time you're 40, you're not going to be able to walk anymore. So, as you can imagine, that was really bad news. So I cried some more. And it started me fretting about what was coming down the road, you know, and indeed it did. It started just getting worse and worse and worse. And at the same time, my husband and I wound up becoming homeless. Somebody bought the building we were living in and doubled the rent, and we just couldn't afford to live there. And we moved into a tent. We bought a tent with, I was 8 months pregnant with our second child, and we had a 2-year-old. And as you can imagine, that wasn't really fun, not camping kind of fun, you know. So we stashed our belongings in somebody's basement and moved into a tent in the mountains in Vermont. And I was really young, and I didn't really quite understand just how kind of marginal that was with a new baby coming. And I worked at the hospital in Burlington, and a well-meaning nurse at that time came up to me who had kind of befriended me, and she said, hey, are you still in that tent? And I said, yeah. And she said, when are you due? And I said, well, about 3 weeks. And she just got right in my face, and she said, I'm just letting you know that you're not taking that baby back to a tent, and I'm calling the state on you, and we're going to take both of your children. Sorry, that one haunts me. And I went back to the tent, and I said to Bill, my husband, I said, I have to get out of here. You know, we have to get out of this tent. And there was a woman who had a real small little camper near us, and we moved into that. And just to get that terror off my back. And so it was very difficult, and but I didn't lose my kids. And soon after that, my husband and I wound up buying a piece of property that we still live on that had a burnt down house on it. So the only thing on it was a little tiny garage, about the size of this, right here. And without running water. And I was okay with that for the first 4 years. It was a bit of Little House on the Prairie. It was kind of cozy and cute for a few years. But what I didn't realize was that it was starting to emotionally take a toll on me because it was very difficult. Again, we didn't have any money. We couldn't just rebuild. We didn't have the experience, the tools, or the finances to build a house. So bit by bit, we were like literally with a jackhammering the burnt down foundation out and hauling it away, and you know, very, very slow progress and stuff. And on year 4 of living in the garage, I had a nervous breakdown. I'd never had one before, so I didn't know that that's what I was having. I just knew I was very sick, and my back was becoming more and more of a problem all the time, and more crippling, and it was keeping me from doing my jewelry work and things like that. And so when I had a nervous breakdown, it was just like they say in the movies, that it's like hitting a wall at 100 miles an hour, you know, it just stops you dead. And in my particular instance, I had uncontrollable anxiety, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it looked like I would get up in the middle of the night out in my rural town and walk down the road and just vomit all night long, because I was just emotionally such a wreck. And so, and my back was getting worse and worse, and it got so bad that I couldn't walk down my driveway to get my mail, both because of my back and because of the anxiety. It started to really create some psychotic problems where I was too anxious to, you know, walk 100 yards, and logic and reason just leave you when you hit that wall. So it was going to be another 3 years before I recovered from that, which again, I didn't know that, but it was pretty tough. So anyways, during this whole thing, my back became so painful that it was just chronic all day long, you know. And one day in desperation, I sort of went over to my kid's little strawberry shortcake bike, you know, those little banana hand seat kind of things. And I couldn't bend over to pick it up. So I kind of kicked it up with one foot and grabbed the handlebars and got on it. And my land is hilly, and the driveway goes down, and then the road goes down, and then it keeps going down to an intersection. And at this intersection, if you turn right, the road kind of drifts away downhill for a while before it levels out. And I just needed to like be free, you know. So I was sitting on this bike. I couldn't pedal it because my legs wouldn't pedal, but I was just like, oh, I'm free, you know, like it just felt good to have air moving past me, you know. And but at the same time, I was terribly anxious because I couldn't imagine how I was going to get home, because I was in such pain. I couldn't really walk very well, but the feeling of coasting was so freeing that I just kept coasting, and I could see the intersection coming in front of me, and I just said to myself, what am I going to do? You know, like, here comes this intersection, and I have to do something. I can either drag my feet and stop at this intersection and just ditch the bike and just try to get home, or I can go through this intersection into I don't know what, and I don't know how. And I remember having this feeling of, I can't go back. I just can't go back to that life. I'm so young, and the rest of my life is just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So I just coasted up to this intersection, and I turned right. And I saw this bullseye in front of my eyes, in my mind's eye. And I just thought, that's it. I can't back away from this challenge. I have to go forward into it. It's the only option. And I was in so much pain that I was just trying to pedal, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And I let the bike coast until the hill ran out, and I was about a mile from home. And I just willed myself to pedal that little strawberry shortcake bike. And I biked with tears because it hurt, but I biked back. And a year later, I did my first century ride. I did a 100-mile ride a year later. Because with that intersection, that turning point, that bullseye, it started something for me that has been a 30-year journey. And I went back to my house and I started practicing just this sort of shifting of my mind from can't, to can. And soon after that, I got the notice in the mail that I was being turned down for disability. I had applied for disability, and I felt there were no other options for me. And I got a rejection notice in the mail, and I was just like, I felt so trapped. I felt like a cornered rat. I had no options. I could not afford the surgery they were talking about. I couldn't do my work. I couldn't take care of my kids. I didn't want to take any medication, which were just painkillers, which were just masking it anyways. They certainly weren't solving any problems, And I just sat on my stairs and I just cried and cried. And then I got down on the floor. Nobody was home, and I got down on the floor, and I decided to kind of just move, to stretch and move until my back hurt, which only took seconds, of course. And then that bullseye appeared again in my mind's eye. And instead of backing away from the pain, like my intuition would tell me, oh, it hurts, stop, move away from that, I formed this bullseye over it, with that pain. And I saw it as something to move toward and through versus backing away from. And so I did that. I stayed down there and I worked through the stretches until I got a little bit more mobile, and then I got up on my couch and whined for 15 minutes. But I only gave myself 15 minutes. I timed it. And then I got back down on the floor again, and I did it again, and I just kind of repeated and repeated and repeated that with that bullseye of kind of pressing into it, moving toward it rather than backing away from it. And slowly, I started to get a little bit of mobility in my back, and that was encouraging to me. And then there would be, I'd bend over to pick something up, and it would be 2 steps back. It'd be 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And so the process of that kind of recovery has been a long one. But when I turned that corner at that intersection, and I knew that there was no turning back for me, what I stopped doing that day, and what I stopped doing that day was looking to somebody else to fix me. I stopped looking to the doctors. I stopped wondering who had a solution for my problem. And I started looking for my own solution. And that was within. And what I realized that day was that I was outfitted with the tools to do it. I didn't have to go get them anywhere. I didn't have to go buy them anywhere. I didn't have to go to school and learn about them. They were inside of me. I had been gifted with them. And I believe we're all gifted with them. There's nothing special or unique about me. And so that day was really the start of my journey of looking within. So that was 30 years ago. And there's 1,000 stories between then and now. But in October, I started a new sport called snow swimming. And it's just like it sounds like, and you're in Vermont, so you can imagine.
I'm wondering about that.
Okay, you're wondering about that.
How does it work?
How does it work? All right. So last winter, I got a bunch of speeding tickets with warnings in between.
Okay.
I have 4 grandchildren. I help take care of my grandchildren, and I have to drive to take care of my grandchildren. So it became a very real threat to one of the greatest joys of my life. I suddenly went, oh my goodness, I have a problem with speeding on the roads. What's going on here? So I took that same mindfulness that I have been practicing for the last 30 years, and I just went, all right, what's the problem here? And I started thinking about it, and what I realized was that I was not seeing the speed limit signs. And I said to myself, why aren't you seeing the speed limit signs? Everybody else can see them, your eyes work. And I said, well, I'm just going to mindfully start going. I'm going to start seeing them. I'm going to start going the speed limit. And I did. And immediately I realized why I never saw them. Because they're so slow. They're so slow. And I was very uncomfortable going them. Literally, physically uncomfortable. I felt like I was going to fall asleep at the wheel. I was bored. And I didn't like it. And I started to feel resentment toward the state for dictating what I wanted to do, because I was safe doing it. So I said, well, I'm 57. I could spend the rest of my life feeling angry and resentful toward the state, because they're, of course, thinking of all of us, not just me. They're thinking about my grandchildren, who I want everyone else to follow the speed limit to keep them safe. So I said, well, I can be angry and resentful and try really hard to go the speed limit and then find myself going too fast and then hit the brake and then this constant Or I can embrace slower. So I decided to embrace slower, and for me that's a big deal because slower and I don't really get along. We're not really friends. I don't like slower.
Maybe you got hooked on speed when you started going down the hill. Freedom.
Yeah, right. Woo! Yeah, I've always liked woohoo! I still do. So I said, well, maybe it wouldn't hurt to just practice something new. Because I've been practicing going fast, and I like excitement and speed and adventure and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I have a bad attitude about slower, or an incorrect attitude about slower. And maybe there's things I'm missing. So I decided to embrace it. I did some meditations on it, and I literally just sort of like opened the door in my mind and peacefully let slower in. And I have noticed that anytime I do something that's good for other people, I get a lot of gifts. Soon I was down at the lake that's 1.5 miles from my house on a dirt road. It's a deep, beautiful, clean lake. I play there all the time. I went down soon after this, and a woman was swimming, doing the Australian crawl or the freestyle, And I was a Vermont kid. I never took a lesson. I know how to survive in the water, but I don't know swim techniques. And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's the most beautiful thing. And I jumped in after her, and I tried to copy her, and I sank like a rock. And I came back to the shore, and I just went, I'm going to learn how to do the freestyle swim. And every day I went down every morning before the sun came up, in the dark, got down in my lake and just started teaching myself to do this crawl. And really enjoyed it. Didn't make much progress quickly or anything, but I was enjoying it. And I realized that it was a slower sport, and I was enjoying it, and I thought that was really cool. And I was rehabbing a knee at the same time, peacefully, without impact of running. So I shifted from running to swimming, helped my knee, helped me go the speed limit. I immediately started going the speed limit, just so you know.
Wow.
And that was over a year ago. And without trying, without any more I'm now very mindful of the speed signs, and I go the speed limit. And it's fine. I'm not saying I'll never get a speeding ticket again, but it's magical. I love it. So I started doing the swimming, and in mid-October it got cold. The air and water temperature got cold, and I had decided that when it got to that, I was going to go into my nearby college pool and spend the rest of the winter continuing this sport. And on October 16th, it was too cold. And it was beginning to affect how long I could stay in. I was staying in about a half hour. And I went, ooh, that's okay. I'm going to have, oh, shucks, I'm going to have to go indoors. And I got out of the water and I thought, I don't want to go indoors, and I don't want to go into a chlorinated pool. I want to stay outside because outside is what I love. And I went home and I dug through my bins and I found a pair of spandex ski tights that had snowflakes on them and a surf shirt, short sleeve surf shirt. And the next morning in the dark, I went down and I got in and I could stay in for half an hour. I couldn't believe how just covering your skin, how effective that was. I never would have thought that. I got out of the water that day and I said, oh! And I saw this bullseye. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to stay in this lake until it freezes over. And I did. I swam in my lake until December 24th. On December 24th, I went to the lake and there was 10 or 15 feet of ice off the shore. And it was about a half-inch thick. So I got down, because my back is so healthy now I can do this. So I got down on my haunches and I went down to the ice and I fist busted it. And I just pushed them out of the way and I went out past the ice and I swam and came back and I stayed in for 11 minutes. And it was cold, cold, cold.
Was it hard getting back on the ice?
Was it hard getting back on the ice?
Yeah.
Oh, it didn't freeze back over that quickly. I was only in for 11 minutes. And so when I came back, I had a channel.
Oh, okay.
And I got back out. The next day, the lake froze over. So I just shifted my behavior from the lake, because now it was frozen over, up into the mountains, because with gravity, the mountain streams stay open. So I'm a Nordic skier, so I took my swimming up into the mountains, and it became a dip. You can't really swim in a mountain stream, you can only dip. And so in my skiing, I incorporated dipping in winter water until February, when the inlet to my lake opened up enough for me to get back into it. And so I went swimming this morning. And I've been swimming in my lake since February. And I have to tell you that it is the most exhilarating thing I've ever done. So slower helped me go the speed limit. It helps me be safe to all the people around me, which I love. It's brought me this new sport that's totally exhilarating. And it is an integral part of my wellness. So anytime I feel bad, mind, body, or spirit, I can jump into ice cold water and let me tell you, that is gone. It's just gone. Once this winter, I started to get sick, right before Christmas. I started to get like a head chest cold. I have a little asthma, but I manage it well. started to get real sick, you know. It was coming on, it was coming, oh, it's gonna get me, you know, had me down for about a day and a half. And I went up on my hill and rolled in the snow without any clothes on. Just rolled in the snow. And it was 24 below.
How'd you do that?
Well, I planned it, so I had no clothes, just a coat, right? And I went, it was very private, it was in my woods, and we had gotten a snowstorm, so it was beautiful snow. And I went up there and I said, I am not, bullseye, I am not going down with this sickness. I don't want to be sick. And I just laid down in the snow, flopped around like a fish, and stood up. And when I stood up, I knew that I had left sick on the ground. I felt it. I felt it leave me. So it's a little counterintuitive because when we think sick or hurt or anything else, we go like this. We close in, we get protective, we go away from the pain, where what I have experienced in the last 30 years is that with a little shift of your mind, that's not, we can do so much more than we think we can, and I have learned to trust it. And snow swimming has awakened my wild voice. We all have a wild voice. So my wild voice is, if you think of your intuition, right? We'll have an intuition, and it tends to be this little voice. It's kind of weak in the knees. It's kind of wobbly. Every once in a while, it just sort of sits on her shoulder and goes, you know. And 9 times out of 10, I would go and flick it and override it and do something else. And I've done that all my life. I've always been aware of it, but I never trusted it. And I never really gave it an awful lot of attention. It's just, oh, that's just that little whispering voice, you know? And with the snow swimming, it required so much something. I don't know what. I told a girlfriend of mine that in order to be in the snow swimming club, you need to have courage and joyous enthusiasm. Those are the 2 requirements. And the courage is not the courage to go in the water, but it's the courage to not listen to everybody who says, you shouldn't do that. You can't do that. It's not good for you to do that. Why are you doing that? And what I realized is that most of the time when people are saying that, they're operating from a place of fear. They're operating from a place of, I can't imagine doing that myself, therefore you should not as well. And that is what I stopped listening to. I stopped asking permission. People were, you know, have you Googled this? Have you looked up hypothermia? Have you done this? Have you done that? And my answer is, I'm a smart woman. I'm not a fool. And I have history with myself. I know how to be well. Better than anybody else out there knows how to be well for me. I know how to be well for me. And so my voice is the voice that I listen to. And way back 30 years ago when I started looking within, this is the voice that is now fully awake, that I listen to first, not last. And that's the stronger voice, because now I trust it. So now I have really grown the confidence in my own wisdom. It's my inner physician. I think we all have an inner physician, an inner advisor. And it doesn't mean that I won't go see someone or look to someone else or go to the hospital or anything like that. I don't feel that way. I don't feel any sort of I can do this all myself. It's just not where I look. And every time I have a problem, mind, body, or spirit, I also have an answer. And I find that answer if I'm willing to take the time to look within and listen, and I always find a solution. And it's a solution It's not a Band-Aid. And wonderful things come as a result. It's never just one thing, it's multiple things.